Great. Do you please take a seat? So if you've got the passage from Luke's Gospel, or if you haven't got that, do get that open in front of you if you can. Now, I want you to imagine a scene with me. Imagine this scene. You're organising an event. You've got a great guest speaker coming, and they're well respected and engaging, and you really want to make a good impression. You've even got some friends and neighbours coming along too. It's all coming together quite nicely. Then, just as the event's getting underway, that person arrives. The one person you didn't really want coming along has just turned up. Just your luck. Everything about them, their clothes, their hairstyle, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And not only have they arrived, but they walk straight to the front row and sit themselves slap bang in the middle in front of your guest speaker. You groan inwardly. What will everyone think? What must this guest speaker be thinking? Then the event starts, and 1 minute into the talk, the person interrupts to ask a question. Oh, and then they do it again a few minutes later. You can hardly watch. But the guest speaker loves it. They're actively encouraging this uninvited guest. You can't believe it. What will the neighbours think? Maybe this guest speaker wasn't such a good idea after all. Now, that's just an imagined story, but the Bible story we're looking at today tells a similar sort of tale. Now, I wonder if you've ever felt a bit like that unexpected guest. Felt like you're not welcome, or that you don't match up to expectations. Maybe you've even felt like that in coming to church, or even in coming to Jesus. Well, if that's you, or if you've ever felt that way, well, today's story has fantastic news for you. But I wonder if you've ever found yourself on the other side of things, like the event organiser in that story. Maybe you found yourself wishing someone would try to fit in a bit more and be a bit less awkward, or do a better job of keeping their mess to themselves. Well, if that's you, if you've ever been tempted to feel that way, and I'm sure I have at times, there's a real challenge to that way of thinking in our story today. It's a real challenge. But there's also hope if we're willing to lay down that attitude and that pride. Because we're going to see today that only those who know they've messed up can find hope and forgiveness in Jesus. Only those who know and are willing to admit they've messed up can find hope and forgiveness. While those who look down on others, well, they will be found out in the end. So let's turn to our story today. It's another mealtime encounter with Jesus. We've had lunch with Levi last week, and today is supper with Simon. Maybe next week it'll be tea time with Thomas. You'll have to come back and see. But the first thing that Luke mentions is an unexpected guest. So Simon the Pharisee has invited Jesus to dinner, and the word gets out. A woman in the area hears about this, and she decides to go along, taking a jar of expensive perfume with her. But this is no ordinary woman. She's described as living a sinful life, one that was notorious in that town. Now, Luke doesn't specify exactly what this sin is. Over the years, most people have tended to think she was probably a prostitute, but he doesn't say. But she is known in that town as a sinful person. But hearing where Jesus is, there is something that clicks. There is something about Jesus that draws her, and she decides that she's got to see him, whatever others might think. But anyway, she comes along to the meal, and she stays at the edge of the room at first. As I was thinking about this, I was wondering what was her plan as she was going there? What was she hoping to do first? So a bit of scene setting might help us to picture what's going on here. See, verse 36, it tells us that Jesus was reclining at the table. And that means in that culture, it would have been a bit like this sort of picture. That's an animation I found. But you would have had a central dining table and these sort of flat couches, all kind of pointing towards the middle table. And the guests would sort of lean on the couch, probably on their elbows, kind of eating the food in the middle, with their feet out behind them. To be honest, it doesn't seem like a very comfortable way to eat, but that was just the way it was at the time. But so we see that the woman had brought the perfume, so that presumably meant she was going to anoint Jesus in some way. But things don't seem to go to plan, because usually you'd expect someone to be anointed on their head in that culture. In fact, in a very similar story in the other Gospels, in the week before Jesus died, Jesus was anointed on his head in such a way. But it looks like she could only reach his feet. So she's standing there, perhaps wondering what to do, but she just finds herself utterly overwhelmed, and the tears begin to flow. Not just a few tears, though, absolute floods of them streaming down her face. And whether planned or not, she finds herself washing Jesus' feet with her tears, and then wiping them clean with her hair. And that would be an extraordinary act in any cultural context. But in that time, in that place, in that culture, such behaviour was utterly unheard of. It was a scandalous degree of intimacy. But she doesn't stop there. She then kisses Jesus' feet and pours the perfume on for good measure. But of course, such an act does not go unnoticed, because the first reaction we get is Simon's. Simon the Pharisee is outraged. In that culture, for any woman to even touch a man who wasn't her husband was seen as shocking. It was absolutely shocking. Let alone with her hair and with kisses, and especially with her reputation. All those things together it meant that kind of every social convention was being ignored before this host's eyes. But what really gets him is Jesus' reaction. You see, we sort of see he's invited Jesus over to suss him out, to get an idea of what kind of guy this Jesus is. And here he sees that Jesus doesn't stop the woman. No, he seems to have accepted it, even welcomed it. And for Simon, this seems to confirm his worst suspicions about Jesus. Surely, he thinks to himself, no prophet, no man of God will be party to such an act. So this dinner party is not going how anyone expected. At this stage, you could cut the tension with a knife. What is Jesus going to do now? Well, we don't have to wait long to find out. Because having had an unexpected guest, we now come to an unexpected response. You see, Jesus finally speaks in verse 40, but not to the woman, but to Simon. And it's interesting, he doesn't respond to anything Simon said out loud. The verse says, Jesus answered him, but he's actually responding to the thoughts in Simon's head. He can read his heart and mind. He knows what he's thinking. And he says simply, Simon, I have something to tell you. Now Simon's mind must have been racing. What now? How is he going to explain his way out of this situation, this scandalous situation? And Jesus' response is to tell him a parable. It's a simple story of two people in debt, both of whom are forgiven by the moneylender, the person they owe money to. And it says that one owes 50 denarii, the other 500. And now a denarius was about a day's wages. So owing 500 denarii was a fair old sum, probably about a year and a half's salary. Perhaps to put it in today's terms, imagine two people who've been called in to meet their bank manager. The first owes a few £1,000s on a loan for some furniture, but they've run out of money to keep up with payments, so they may lose their sofa. The second owes tens of thousands of pounds on their mortgage, but they've also got no money to meet their repayments, and so it looks like they're going to lose their home. Then, in an act of extraordinary, you might even say implausible, generosity, the bank manager decides to write off both their debts. Their debts are forgiven. Now, how would you feel if that was you? Imagine yourself in that situation. I mean, person one who gets to keep their sofa, I think they would be relieved. They'd be very glad, wouldn't they? But imagine how that second person felt. Imagine feeling 1 minute thinking, I'm going to lose my home. I don't know where I'm going to live. And suddenly, you get to keep your home. It's secure and safe. It's forgiven. I mean, you would weep with gratitude, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be able to thank them enough. And that's the question that Jesus poses to Simon. Which of the two debtors will love more? And now he's in a bit of a predicament here. Because the answer is obvious, isn't it? But he's got a funny feeling there's a bit more going on here. He doesn't quite get it yet, but he's kind of, I don't really want to answer this question, but I've got to. And so he says, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. Correct, says Jesus. Now, if the tension was thick before, Jesus has ramped things up even more. And where's Jesus going with this story of forgiveness? And it's at this point that Jesus brings about not just an unexpected, but a shocking reversal. A shocking reversal. Jesus is about to draw back the curtain and show what's really been going on here. Because he turns to the woman, but still keeps talking to Simon. And we see in verse 44, he says, do you see this woman? Well, I think it's fair to say Simon had already noticed her, hadn't he? And Jesus says, I came into your house. And that's an emphatic line. It shows that Simon is hosting Jesus. Simon is the host here, and that comes with certain expectations, especially in a culture which prized hospitality. But these were expectations that Simon had left unmet. And in quick succession, Jesus shows how Simon, far from being a good host, had really actually set out to insult Jesus as his guest. And we can easily miss that. But just to help us think about that for our own time, let's consider this question. What kind of things do you do when someone comes round for dinner at your house? Not a rhetorical question, any thought. What would you do? So, as someone arrives at your house for dinner, what are the kinds of things you do?
Offer them a drink.
Offer them a drink, yeah.
You say how pleased you are to have them come.
Yeah, you say how pleased you are to see them, absolutely. Take their coat, not in this weather, but yeah, it's actually normally you'd, yeah, definitely take their coats. Anything else?
Provide food for them.
Yeah, provide food for them, that is key. Yeah, those are the kinds of things you do. You might say, oh, come through and sit here, wait here, dinner will be this at this sort of time. Those sorts of things. Well, now imagine having someone over and doing none of those. Absolutely none of them. Basically, the doorbell goes, you come open the door and go, oh, all right, and you turn away, and you walk off, and just leave them there, standing there. You don't take their coat, you don't offer them a drink, you don't welcome them in. I mean, they may well still stay for dinner, but they are not going to feel welcome, are they? But that's not all that Jesus does here. Because where Simon had failed, it was the woman who had stepped up with abundant generosity. You see, she had been the true host here. Where Simon had given no water for washing Jesus' feet as he had arrived, the woman had washed his feet with her tears. Where Simon had given no customary kiss of greeting, she had kissed Jesus' feet. And where Simon hadn't even given some common olive oil just to anoint Jesus' head, which would have been expected at the time, the woman has gone beyond that to anoint Jesus' feet with expensive perfume. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. She, the one who was seen as shunned and rejected, is the real host here. And Simon is the one who has insulted Jesus. And we see the full irony of Simon's initial reaction. You see, he thought Jesus was ignorant or immoral for not rejecting what the woman was doing. And yet Jesus recognized exactly what was going on in her heart. And still more, he knew exactly what was in Simon's heart as well. You see, now the meaning of the parable is crystal clear, isn't it? The woman is the one who's been forgiven much. You see, there's no downplaying of her sin here. It's not saying, oh, she wasn't really a sinner. No, verse 47 says her sins were many. But having previously heard Jesus' message at some point, she knows now what it is to be forgiven, for her shame and her guilt to be taken away. And her response is this grateful, extravagant love. And that she shows us with her extravagant devotion to Jesus. She has been forgiven much, and so she loves much. But is Simon the one who's been forgiven little? That's a question I had. Is he the other person in the story? Well, to be honest, it's not clear that he's even got that far. He seems blind to his sin. His pride and self-righteousness have blinded him to his own need for forgiveness. He's not going to seek forgiveness, especially not from this Jesus guy who seems to welcome what's happened. And so he has no love for Jesus, and hence his willingness to insult him as his guest. He's not really been forgiven at all, and so he doesn't really love at all. And so as we come to the end of the story, Jesus finally speaks to the woman. And having lifted her up and exalted her by praising her loving service, he reassures her again that her sins are forgiven. Her faith in him, Jesus, is her salvation, and she can go in peace. You can imagine the stunned silence in the room after this took place. The force of Jesus' parable was abundantly clear to everyone in the room. But that same parable comes piercing through the pages of Scripture right to our own hearts too. Because where do we find ourselves in that picture? You see, to those who see themselves as kind of basically all right, not needing to come grovelling to Jesus for forgiveness, well, there's a stark warning here. You see, it's precisely those who think that they're all sorted out who are most blind to their own sin. But if that's you today, don't despair. There is no grand gesture that we need to make first. All we need to do is come to Jesus. Come as we are, asking for forgiveness. You see, the woman's acts of devotion here, they weren't what earned her forgiveness. She didn't do that and then get forgiven. No, it's the other way around. The love she shows, the outburst of love, is a response to the forgiveness, the free forgiveness that she has found. She knew she had many sins, but she knows now she has been forgiven and freed from them. And on that point, it just struck me. This is why trying to downplay the seriousness of sin is so deadly for us as Christians. There are some who think, well, we mustn't talk too much about sin and our sinfulness because that is off-putting. But actually, the danger is that not only does that give us a false sense of security, but actually it takes away the wonder of forgiveness, of knowing how great our sin is, helps us to see how amazing the wonder of God's forgiveness is. And actually the loving gratitude that brings. So for those of us who, if we know that we've been forgiven much, then we will love much. But if you're here today and you're feeling like life is a bit of a mess at home, a mess at work, a mess in every area of your life, And maybe you don't feel that you would fit in with God's people. Well, come and join the club. Really, the only requirement for entry is admitting that you couldn't meet any entry requirements. There's nothing we need to make ourselves worthy, to earn our way to come to Jesus. He invites us to come as we are, as the woman came to him as she was and found forgiveness. And so as we look to the days ahead, in the coming days and weeks, let's allow this reality of Jesus' radical welcome to change how we think about those around us. Even this week, whether it might be a homeless person on the street you try to avoid, or the work colleague you find difficult and usually ignore, or the neighbours that you're tempted to look down on, whoever it might be in your life. Remember Jesus' radical welcome to this woman who everyone else was shunning, but Jesus welcomed. Remember the forgiveness that she found and the love that she showed. Because this is the kind of community that comes from being around Jesus, the community that we are called to be. Sharing our lives, maybe sharing our dining tables with all sorts of people, all called to look to Jesus with that same love and devotion we see in this woman. But to get there, it's not about summoning that up from amongst ourselves. No, we first need to hear Jesus say to each one of us, because of the salvation he's won for us on the cross, your sins are forgiven. Trust in me for your salvation. Go in peace. Amen.